Turin, Italy. A cold January morning in 1889. You find yourself walking on the smooth cobblestones of Piazza Carlo Alberto, just a few miles northwest of the gentle Po River. A thick fog envelops the majestic domes, and the biting cold of the Piedmont winter pierces through your thick wool coat. You are a 4-year-old man, with a heavy, drooping mustache and the hunched posture of someone who has spent decades battling his own body. Suddenly, a whip crack tears through the silence. You turn and see a coachman repeatedly lashing an old horse. Something inside your already fragile soul shatters. You rush forward, throwing your arms around the animal's neck, tears streaming down your face, moaning senseless words before the darkness falls. You collapse onto the stone pavement, and the brilliant world of great thoughts suddenly recedes. This moment, the collapse of one of the 19th century's most brilliant minds, is the stopping point for lonely journeys. But it is the starting point for the journey we are about to experience together. Welcome to Mind Manor. Tonight, we will not just learn about a philosopher, but we will embody the paradoxical life of a man who dared to challenge God himself. This is a Friedrich Nietzsche biography for sleep, a deep, immersive experience designed to help your mind relax, cast away all the worries of a long day, and drift into sleep through gentle yet philosophical history lessons. You are Friedrich. From a shy boy in a Prussian parsonage to a wandering philosopher under the sun of southern Italy. Together, we will walk through the stone corridors of Pforta boarding school, listen to the passionate music of Wagner, and face the brilliant solitude on the snow-capped Alps. Before we travel back in time to the peaceful countryside of 1844, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and like this video. It is a small but meaningful act to help our common home grow. And I am very curious, where in the world are you listening to this story tonight? And what time is your clock showing? Leave a comment below so that kindred spirits in this vast night can find each other, or simply so I know at what moment your night began. I promise to read them all, because that is how these historical stories never become cold. Now, let your breath slow down. Feel the softness of your pillow, and let the church bells in the ancient village of Röcken lead you back to the beginning of everything. Part 1. Born in Röcken and Family Tragedies, 1844, 1854. You open your eyes, and the first thing you feel is not light, but sound. The church bells echo from afar, solemn and steady, like the heartbeat of this Saxony land. You find yourself standing in the middle of a lush green field, flat to the horizon. This is Röcken, where it all began. In 1844, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of dry grass and the moisture of the earth after an early morning rain brushes past your face. You look down at your small hands. You are Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, and the world around you right now is a perfect arrangement of order, faith, and absolute peace. Every step you take on the trail leading back to the parsonage carries a sense of belonging. You breathe deeply, the air thick with the scent of aromatic candles and old book pages, deeply, deeply, deeply. Here, religion is not just dry lectures on the pulpit every Sunday morning. It is breath. It is identity. It is the invisible string tightening every brick, every branch, into a divine will. Your clan, from your grandfather to your father, were all gatekeepers of the Lutheran faith. You grew up under the protection of a prestigious theological lineage where every word spoken carried the weight of the scripture. You feel the presence of God in every meal, every prayer before bed, a sense of security so profound that sometimes you imagine this world will remain unchanging forever like this. But look at your name, Friedrich Wilhelm. You were named after King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia, who shares the same birthday, October 15th, with you. Your father, Mr. Karl Ludwig, chose this name with all loyalty and gratitude toward the monarch. You were born right at the center of the ruling system, amidst the most conservative and devout values a child could inherit. There is a paradox silently blooming right in your veins. Who could have suspected that the boy devoutly bowing before the altar would one day hold the hammer of philosophy to shatter all idols? The one who would declare to the world that God is dead. It is from the very core of this tradition that a seed of the greatest rebellion in history is beginning to take shape. You step into your father's study. The room is packed with leather-bound books reaching to the ceiling. The smell of old paper and ink envelops your palate. You like to sit quietly at your father's feet, watching him slide his hands over the piano keys. His music is not just notes. It is the narrative of a gentle and intellectual soul. The villagers look at you, a quiet boy with eyes older than his years, and they smile, calling you the little pastor. You know long passages of scripture by heart. You sing hymns with a high, clear voice. You believe in the cosmic order that your father embodies. To you, Father is not just a man. He is the voice of God, the pillar holding up your sky so it does not collapse. Your family is a fortress of happiness. The appearance of your sister Elizabeth and then your brother Ludwig Joseph seem to complete that fulfilling picture. You find yourself running on the paths around the church, feeling the warmth of your mother, Mrs. Franziska, the vibrant young woman who always envelops you with devoted love. Everything has meaning. Everything follows the predictable rhythm of the church schedule, from Advent to Easter. You have never known chaos. You have never known that destiny is silently weaving a dark web right over your family's head. 1848 arrives, bringing with it the cold winds of change. Not just the revolutions shaking Europe out there, but a brutal revolution taking place right inside your father's body. You begin to hear groans of pain coming from the bedroom instead of the familiar piano music. Terrible headaches begin to besiege him. You huddle behind the door, seeing your great father gradually swallowed by darkness. He loses his sight. He is blind for many days. Then, seizures begin to appear. The decay takes place slowly and horrifyingly, to the point it stifles your young heart. You witness the symbol of protection, the voice of God in your small world, gradually lose the ability to speak and even stop recognizing his own beloved son. The disease softening of the brain, a haunting medical term of that era, stripped away everything. On a night in late July 1849, a terrifying silence enveloped the parsonage. Your father drew his last breath at the age of 35. At that moment, a deep crack appeared in your soul. You look into the coffin, and for the first time in your life, you feel the betrayal of faith. If God is real, why would he let his most faithful servant die in such madness and pain? The fear of a dark inheritance begins to take root in you. You wonder if your father's fate is waiting for you at the end of the road. But death does not stop there. Darkness seems to have found its way into your home, and it does not want to leave yet. One night, you sink into a strange and prophetic dream. You see your father's grave open in the middle of the cold cemetery. He emerges in a stark white shroud, enters the church, and then returns, carrying a small child in his arms. The grave closes, swallowing them both. The next morning, you wake up to your mother's heart-wrenching cries. Your younger brother, Ludwig Joseph, has fallen ill. And in just a blink of an eye, that child, not yet 2 years old, also passed away, lying down next to father's grave. Your safe world, ordained by God, has completely collapsed. Within just 6 months, you lost both your father and your brother. Your innocence was brutally stripped away. You realize that this world has no absolute protection, and suffering can strike without any reason or explanation. You stand before the 2 newly dug graves, feeling the cold of the winter of 1850 pierce to your very bones. The order you once believed in is now nothing but fragments. Your father's passing also means you must leave the only home you've ever known. The parsonage no longer belongs to your family. You look at your mother, the young widow, only 23 years old, quietly packing the last items. You hold Elizabeth's hand, stepping out of the familiar wooden door, leaving behind the sweet memories in Röcken. You are no longer the little pastor of this village. You are a traveler, beginning a journey into an uncertain future. April 1850. You sit in the carriage, leaving the familiar countryside. The sound of the wheels grinding on the trail sounds like the sigh of the past. You move to Naumburg, a small city located on the banks of the Saal River. There, you move into a quiet house with your grandmother and 2 aunts. You become the only man in a world of women, a space full of piety, sighs, and memories of the dead. You feel the scent of dried flowers and the cold of rooms with windows always closed. You step off the carriage, your feet touching the cold stone of Naumburg streets. The smell of steam from the Saal River rises, mixing with the musty smell of ancient houses. You pull your coat tight, feeling the isolation surrounding you as strange figures brush past on the street. Part 2. Studying in Naumburg in the prestigious Pforta boarding school, 1851. 1863. The clip-clop of horse hooves on the narrow stone streets of Naumburg gradually thins out and then stops altogether. You step off the carriage, feeling the damp cold of the Saal region seep through your thin shoe soles. Before you is a new house, an unfamiliar space, yet filled with familiar faces from the past. The scent of dried lavender and candle wax rises from the dark corners of the hallway. You take a deep breath, but your chest feels tight from the presence of 5 women, mother, grandmother, 2 aunts, and Sister Elizabeth. Your world now no longer has the heavy, solemn footsteps of a father, but only the rustle of long skirts and the soft whispers of prayer. The absence of the only man in the house creates an almost terrifying silence. You find yourself becoming more withdrawn, like a small creature trying to adapt to a new shell. In this matriarchal home, the memory of your late father does not fade, but becomes a virtuous ghost, overshadowing every activity. You lock yourself in your room for hours, not to play boisterous games, but to immerse yourself in old Bibles with worn leather spines. You see yourself standing on the high pulpit of the church, your high and clear singing voice echoing through the ancient stone vaults, making the elders stop and exclaim, "The little pastor." You perform religious rituals with an almost extreme seriousness, as if it were the only way for you to maintain a connection with the Father lying in a grave in Röcken. In 1851, the first Greek and Latin letters appear before your eyes under the guidance of teacher Weber. Those squiggly characters are not just language. They are doors opening to another world, more distant and majestic than the small reality in Naumburg. You feel a vibration in your fingertips when touching ancient texts. A thirst for knowledge begins to bloom, filling the void left by family tragedy. Your piety begins to blend with a strange intellectual passion, a combination of pure faith and a bottomless curiosity about the origin of thought. Fortunately, your life is not just prayers. You meet Wilhelm Pinder and Gustav Krug. Afternoons wandering along the banks of the Saal River with them bring you a sense of freedom. At Krug's house, you sit before a magnificent piano, feeling the intense vibrations of noble music seep into every fiber of your being. You even stand stunned upon hearing news of a meeting with Felix Mendelssohn here. Music becomes your second language, an escape for emotions that words cannot fully express. In 1854, when you and two friends enter the Domgymnasium, you feel you are beginning a long journey, where music and poetry will be your most loyal companions. Time passes, and your family moves to a larger house, where you have a private space to nurture your strongly rising artistic inclinations. You begin to write poetry, composing your first musical pieces with surprising confidence. You record every achievement in your diary with a discreet pride. Yet, right when your soul is soaring most, your body begins to protest. At age 12, the first headaches strike like hammer blows to your temples. You find yourself lying in a dark room, your eyes aching so much you cannot bear any ray of light leaking through the door crack. Migraines begin to become a part of your life. You have to miss school for many days, lying still in the dark, feeling the helplessness of a brilliant intellect imprisoned in a sickly body. This is the first paradox you must face. A spirit yearning to reach the peaks, but bound by physical pain inherited from your father. Despite this, in the brief moments between pains, you never stop composing. You write plays, you reflect on your father's death with a heartbreaking maturity. You begin to form strict standards for art. You love the precision of Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, but feel contempt for contemporary romantic composers like Liszt or Berlioz. You call their music solely for enjoyment or to make a public exhibition of itself. You seek something deeper, an art capable of elevating the human soul instead of merely pleasing the ears. In September 1858, a major turning point occurs. You receive a full scholarship to Pforta. You stand before the gates of this prestigious boarding school, looking up at the thick stone walls of the ancient Cistercian monastery. Surrounded by old forests and quiet fields, It is completely isolated from the outside world. Pforta is not just a school. It is an elite forge with iron discipline. You must wake up before dawn, when fog still covers the cold stone corridors. The scent of old books and dust in the library blends with the smell of old pines from the forest behind. 10 hours a day, you immerse yourself in the world of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and Virgil. You learn to think in ancient Greek, to argue in sharp Latin. But amidst the environment of noisy and sometimes cruel boys, you feel like an outsider. You watch them from afar, feeling an irredeemable distance. You recognize the difference between yourself and the herd. This feeling of solitude does not make you sad. On the contrary, it ignites in you a pride in being different. You bury yourself in study, becoming the top student, exceeding even the expectations of the strictest teachers. The isolation at Pforta is precisely the fertile ground for your future ideas about the superior individual to begin taking root. In the summer of 1860, the desire for intellectual connection led you to found the Germania Society with Pinder and Krug. The three of you, with all the enthusiasm of youth, vow to explore new frontiers of culture together. Discussions lasting until late at night about literature and music become your lifeblood. And then, a letter from Gustav Krug changes everything. He tells of Richard Wagner and the opera Tristan und Isolde. Initially, you resist. You think it is a breaking of the classical rules you have always worshipped. But Wagner's music is like a flood, silently eroding the barriers in your mind. You begin to be drawn to Slavic folk melodies, Hungarian tones full of wildness and freedom. You realize that art is not just order, but an explosion of emotion. This shift also takes place in literature. You write an essay defending Friedrich Hölderlin, a forgotten poet. You feel a strange affinity with his pain and madness. And then you encounter Lord Byron's Manfred, the image of the superhuman hero, one who dares to challenge both destiny and conventional knowledge, strikes your soul powerfully. It is at this moment, under the dim candlelight in the boarding room at Pforta, that your pen first sets down the word Übermenschlich, a concept still in its infancy, but already containing the seeds of a great philosophical revolution. But as your intellect reaches further, the rebellion against reality becomes stronger. In 1862, the essay Fate and History was born as an implicit declaration of war against what you were taught. You realize that the customs, beliefs, and morals humans inherit are just invisible chains. You begin to question Christianity, the very morality that enveloped your childhood. You understand that to be truly free, man must dare to shatter his own foundations of thought. The rebellion in thought leads to impulsive actions in real life. You begin to turn to alcohol and tobacco as a way to break the grip of iron discipline at Pforta. You want to taste the flavor of recklessness, to test your own limits, but destiny always has a way of pulling you back to reality. One drunken night in the spring of 1863, you are caught. Punishment comes immediately. You are demoted, stripped of your prefect status, and held back for a semester. This fall is a blow to your pride, but it also teaches you that the price of freedom is always very high. Regardless, in late summer 1864, you complete your graduation exams. You stand in the courtyard of Pforta for the last time, looking up at the stone arches that witnessed your painful maturation. You carry within you a heart full of doubts about religion, but paradoxically, you choose to enroll in the Faculty of Theology at the University of Bonn. Perhaps out of respect for your family, or perhaps you want to thoroughly understand the enemy you are about to confront. You step out of the Pforta gates, carrying a suitcase heavy with classical books. The sound of your shoes echoes dryly on the trail leading to the train station. The sky ahead is slowly turning to the deep purple of twilight, and you find yourself walking toward the majestic Rhine River, where new challenges await. Part 3. Enrolling in university, abandoning theology, and meeting Wagner. 1864, 1868. The steam train whistle shrieks, tearing through the thick fog enveloping the Rhine River. You step off at the Bonn train station on an October afternoon in 1864. The pungent smell of coal blends with the moisture of the river water and the scent of yellowed fallen leaves on the streets. You stand there, a 19-year-old boy with eyes containing the sternness of Pforta, but deep inside is a wordless unease. The suitcase in your hand is heavy with philology and classical books, but the real burden lies in your mother's expectations. Mrs. Franziska wants you to become a pastor, a worthy successor to the family's theological bloodline. You walk on the cobblestone streets of the university city, feeling the hurried, free rhythm of student life surrounding you. The silence of the old monastery is now replaced by the noisy laughter in beer halls. You join the Franconia student fraternity, donning traditional attire and trying to immerse yourself in endless nights of singing. You hold a large beer glass, feeling the bitterness of the foam wash over your teeth, and listen to the clashing of swords in duels. In a moment of youthful impulsiveness, you also stood there, facing an opponent, feeling the coldness of steel before a cut left a scar on the bridge of your nose. But amidst those herd-like cheers, you feel like a lost soul. You look at the faces flushed red with alcohol and wonder, is this truly the intellectual life I crave? The emptiness of herd rituals begins to stifle you. You find yourself gradually detaching from the festivities, retreating to quiet rooms to face the questions gnawing at your faith. Bonn brings not only social freedom, but is also where you begin a brutal anatomy of Christianity. Under the flickering light of an oil lamp, you bury yourself in the pages of David Strauss and Ludwig Feuerbach. Each line is like a sharp blade severing the link between you and heaven. You realize that the miracles you once sang about in church were merely myths woven from human psychological needs. God did not create man in his image, but rather man, in fear and longing for comfort, created an image of God. You feel the chill of emptiness beginning to spread through your soul. If there is no God, your Father's cosmic order was only an illusion. You find yourself at a crossroads, where one side is the artificial piece of faith, and the other is the cruel but brilliant truth. The Easter holiday of 1865 inches Naumburg becomes a battlefield of emotions. You stand before your mother and sister, in the familiar living room filled with the scent of dried flowers and memories. When you declare your refusal to go to church, a silence envelops the space heavier than a block of stone. You see your mother's eyes blur with tears, see the shock on Elizabeth's face. Rejecting the path of a pastor feels like an act of murder against the family's last hopes. But you cannot be otherwise. If you wish to strive for peace of soul and pleasure, then believe. If you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire. You write these lines to your sister as a declaration of independence. You accept becoming a sinner in the eyes of your family so as not to be a hypocrite to yourself. In October 1865, you leave Bonn for Leipzig, following Professor Ritschl like a seeker of salvation in ancient words. Leipzig appears with more majesty and antiquity, where old bookstores sit side by side in narrow alleys. You immerse yourself in classical philology, using the meticulousness of science to fill the void of faith. Professor Ritschl sees in you a phenomenon, an intellect so sharp it is astonishing. You write about Theognis, about Aristotle with an insight far beyond your years. You become close friends with Erwin Rodi, the soulmate who will share your dreams of a new culture. Yet, deep down, you still feel a missing piece. Philology only shows you the past, but it does not help you understand the meaning of existence. And then, on a fateful afternoon in late 1865, you step into an old bookstore. The smell of damp paper, rotting wood, and dust envelops your senses. Your fingers brush over anonymous book spines until they stop at a book titled The World as Will and Representation by Arthur Schopenhauer. You do not know what demon urged you to take that book home. In your cramped rented room in Leipzig, under the flickering candlelight, you turn each page and feel as if a bolt of electricity is running down your spine. Schopenhauer does not speak of a benevolent God. He speaks of will, a blind, irrational, and ceaselessly craving force that operates the entire universe. You see yourself in the cruel mirror that Schopenhauer holds up. Life is a chain of suffering, a loop between longing and boredom. You remember your father's death, the collapse of your family, and for the first time, you find an explanation that does not require divine revelation. From every line I heard the cry of renouncement, denial, and resignation. Schopenhauer's pessimistic philosophy does not crush you. On the contrary, it brings you a terrifying freedom. You realize that music and art are the only ways for humans to temporarily escape the tyranny of the will. You begin to look at the world not through the lens of Christian morality, but through the power of aesthetic contemplation. Schopenhauer becomes the spiritual teacher, the intellectual father you have been searching for. But life is not just pages of books. The wave of Prussian nationalism rises, pulling you out of philosophical reflections. In October 1867, you don the rough military uniform, joining the artillery unit in Naumburg. You feel the weight of the gun, the tarry smell of gunpowder, and the pungent odor of the stables. You try to be an exemplary soldier, riding on tall war horses, feeling the muscular power of the beast blending with your will. You enjoy the sense of discipline and physical strength, a contrast to intellectual fragility. Yet, destiny strikes once again. On a March morning in 1868, as you attempt to leap into the saddle, a slip of the foot changes everything. You hear the crack of ribs and a piercing pain through your chest. You fall to the ground, your breath catching in your throat. Two left side muscles are torn open. You lie there on the cold earth, looking up at the bright blue German sky, feeling the betrayal of your own body. This injury not only ends your military career, but also sows the seeds for chronic pain that will follow you until the end of your life. You spend days convalescing in bed, listening to the ticking of the wall clock and using the pain to forge your spirit. You complete your essay on Diogenes Laertius in a state of exhaustion but clarity, proving that even in physical collapse, the intellect can still shine. In the autumn of 1868, you return to Leipzig with a brilliant academic reputation, but with a body starting to wither. And then, the night of the 8th of November 1868 arrives, bringing the encounter that will reshape your entire life. You enter Professor Brockhaus's house on a rainy evening. The smell of rainwater on your coat blends with the scent of fine wood and wine in the luxurious room. You stand there, 24 years old, and face Richard Wagner, the Wagner, 5-year-old man with burning eyes and the aura of a god. Wagner is not just a composer, he is the embodiment of everything Schopenhauer wrote about the genius. The piano music rises under Wagner's hands. The melodies of Die Meistersinger fill the room, vibrating to your very bones. You listen to Wagner talk about art, about the decay of German culture, and about the longing to rebirth the world through music. When the conversation turns to Schopenhauer, you feel a surge of intense emotion, realizing that both are devotees of the pessimistic philosopher. Wagner looks at you, seeing the erudition and fervor in your eyes. To you, Wagner is the figure of the lost great father, a flesh and blood Dionysus standing before you. Wagner was the very incarnation of what Schopenhauer had written on the genius. At the end of the evening, when Wagner warmly invites you to visit the Tribschen estate in Switzerland, you know that a new chapter, brilliant and stormy, is opening before you. You walk out of the house, the chill of the Leipzig night piercing through your coat, but your heart is burning with a new flame. You walk on the dark road, the sound of your shoes tapping on the stones like the knocking of destiny. The dim streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and you find yourself heading south toward the snow-capped mountains of Basel, where a professorial chair and conversations with Wagner await. Part 4. Professor in Basel, and publishing the first book, 1869-1871. The sound of train wheels grinding on Swiss tracks carries a new, steady, and promising rhythm. You sit by the window, watching the snow-capped alpine peaks gradually emerge under the pale sunlight of the spring of 1869. The smell of steam and engine oil blends with the fresh, cold air characteristic of the highlands. You reach out to smooth the fold of your coat, feeling the momentous change taking place in your life. Only 24 years old, an age when many are still struggling to find their way, you have been called to hold the position of extraordinary professor at the University of Basel. You find yourself entering a world of black robes, ancient libraries, and solemn lectures. This rapid ascent feels like a strange dream that even you sometimes doubt. You remember the proud look in Professor Ritschl's eyes when he wrote the weightiest recommendations for you, calling you the most brilliant student in his 40 years of teaching. To formalize this position, the University of Leipzig awarded you an honorary doctorate without requiring any examination, a rare privilege for a superior intellect. But with glory came a painful decision. At the request of the Swiss authorities, you had to renounce your Prussian citizenship. You set your pen to the paper, renouncing your origins, feeling the slight vibration of the nib on the rough surface. From that moment on, you became stateless, a traveler without a fatherland, belonging only to the kingdom of thought and ancient words. On the 19th of April, 1869, you officially stepped onto the campus of the University of Basel. The smell of wood dust in the lecture hall, mixed with the musty scent of ancient Greek texts, greets you. You stand on the high pulpit, looking down at the young student faces, curiously observing the youngest professor in their history. Your inaugural lecture, Homer and Classical Philology, echoes in absolute silence. You speak of heroes, of epic verses with a fierce passion, but deep inside, you begin to feel the constriction of pure philology. You want to search for something more vivid, a philosophy that can shake the very roots of existence rather than just analyzing linguistic prefixes and suffixes. In Basel, you find solace in friendships with Franz Overbeck and the historian Jacob Burckhardt. Conversations over hot tea amidst the Basel cold help you maintain your sanity against academic pressures. But the true center of your spiritual life lies not far away, the Tribschen estate on the shores of Lake Lucerne. Whenever you have time, you leave Basel to find refuge with Richard Wagner and Cosima. You walk on the lush green grass leading to the villa, feeling the moisture of the lake and the melodic music drifting from the windows. Wagner, at this time, is not just a great composer to you. He is a father figure, someone who fills the immense void your father left since childhood. The Tribschen circle envelops you in an atmosphere of absolute freedom and creativity. You find yourself sitting in the luxurious living room, the smell of Wagner's expensive tobacco blending with Cosima's elegant perfume. You read Greek plays aloud to them, the sounds of ancient Greek echoing amidst a space filled with the spirit of modern art. You play the piano, feeling Wagner's notes vibrate under your fingertips, a sensation of blending the great past with a bright future. On Christmas Eve, 1869, when the Siegfried Idyll was played secretly as a gift for Cosima, you stood there, among your closest friends, feeling you truly belonged to something great. Tribschen was where you believed a German cultural renaissance was beginning, and you were the one chosen to lay its philosophical foundation. But then, the battle trumpets of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 tore through the silence of artistic dreams. Though stateless, the Prussian blood in you rose strongly. You asked the university for permission to volunteer for the medical corps. You wanted to witness the tragedy of the age with your own eyes, to experience the power of will amidst destruction. You find yourself standing among the field camps in Nancy, where the smell of blood, the stench of gangrenous wounds, and the smell of cheap disinfectant rise pungently. You do not hold a gun, but you hold blood-soaked bandages. You see young bodies torn by weapons, the vacant stares of soldiers dying in the mud. War did not bring you the heroism found in classical poems. It brought you disgust and the devastating illness of diphtheria, along with dysentery. You lie in a cramped shack, feeling the fever scorching your skin and the utter depletion of your digestive system. Every breath carries the bitter taste of lurking death. During long nights struggling with the Reaper, your nationalist fervor began to cool. You realized that Bismarck's brilliant military victories were only a mist covering cultural decay. You saw the brutality of man toward man, and you began to be disillusioned with a great German empire built on corpses. You returned to Basel with a withered body, but a mind aflame with new ideas. Failing health forced you to retreat into dark rooms in the Alps to convalesce. The smell of cold air and the silence of the high peaks helped you focus on your first major work. You wrote in pain, as your vision blurred and headaches felt like they would explode your temples. You combined reflections on Greek tragedy with Schopenhauer's philosophy and Wagner's aesthetics. The result was The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music, born in January 1872. This work was not a dry philological book. It was a scream of creativity, a revolution in thought. You proposed the theory of the duality between the Apollonian and Dionysian spirits. You imagined the god Apollo with blinding light, representing order, reason, and clear forms. It is the beauty of pristine marble statues, of restraint and boundaries. But hidden deep beneath that shell is the god Dionysus, the god of intoxication, of intense emotion, and the breaking of all barriers. You felt the pulse of Dionysus in the rhythmic drums, in the fury of nature, and in the dark nights of the soul. You argued that great Greek tragedy was only born when these two forces blended perfectly. You accused Socrates of killing art with dry rationalism. And you declared, with all innocence and enthusiasm, that Wagner was the rebirth of the Dionysian spirit in the modern world. You excitedly sent the book out, expecting an explosion of praise. Wagner was overjoyed to see himself honored as a god, but the academic world received it with a terrifying silence. Then, the silence was broken by thunder from Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Mellendorf. The review, Philology of the Future, dealt a fatal blow to your career. Wilamowitz called your book a disgrace, a piece of unscientific junk due to the lack of traditional footnotes and methodology. You found yourself pushed to the margins of the community, where you were once the brightest star. Even your old teacher Ritschl maintained a cold attitude, considering your work a regrettable mistake. Students began to boycott your classes. You step into the lecture hall. The smell of chalkboard chalk is the same, but the rows of desks are now empty. Only 2 students sit quietly in the corner of the vast room. You feel the cold of isolation beginning to seep into your heart. The book you poured your heart into was now considered dropping stillborn from the press. But it was in this bitter academic failure that you realized your true path. You were no longer a content scholar. You began to become an independent philosopher, one who dared to challenge the world with painful truths. You pack up the lesson plans on the desk, feeling the emptiness of the old classroom. You walk out the door, the sound of your shoes echoing lonely in the quiet hallway of the University of Basel. You see the sunset descending over the Rhine, and you know that you need to go. You need to find a larger space for the thoughts exploding in your heart. You step down the stone stairs, the wind from the river blowing in, carrying the smell of water and freedom. You tighten your scarf, turning your gaze toward the trails leading up to the mountains, where a brilliant solitude awaits to welcome a philosopher of the future. Part 5. Breaking with Wagner and Developing New Thoughts. 1872. 1878. You stand in the printing house in Basel on an early morning in 1872. The pungent smell of ink blends with the scent of new paper and the moisture of winter still lingering in the air. You hold the first printed copy of The Birth of Tragedy, Out of the Spirit of Music. The rough feel of the book cover under your fingertips is a confirmation of the existence of the thoughts burning in your heart. This is not a dry research work for dusty bookshelves. It is a manifesto, a scream of a soul wanting to wake the world from the slumber of rationalism. You turn each page and see the eternal opposition between 2 gods. In your mind, Apollo appears with the blinding light of dawn, the god of order, of harmony, and exquisite forms. You feel the stillness of marble statues, where every line is clear and restrained. It is the principium individuationis, the principle that keeps man within the safe boundaries of reason. But then, from the deep darkness, the rhythmic drums of Dionysus sound. You feel the pulse of chaos, the smell of fermenting wine, and absolute intoxication. Dionysus breaks all barriers, dissolving the individual into the powerful flow of nature. You argue that ancient Greek tragedy was the magical moment when these two forces embraced each other. A fragile balance allowing man to look directly into the abyss of pain while still affirming life. And you, with all your devotion, dedicated this book to Richard Wagner, declaring that his music was the rebirth of the Dionysian spirit in an age dying from the excessive sobriety of Socrates. Yet, your excitement is quickly doused with freezing water. You step into the university lecture hall, and instead of applause, you receive only a terrifying silence. The smell of chalkboard chalk and old wood in the classroom suddenly becomes stifling as you face rows of empty seats. Future Philology by Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Moellendorff dealt a fatal blow to your reputation. He mocks you as an unscientific dreamer, a traitor to strict academic standards. You see colleagues turn their backs, students boycott your classes. Isolation begins to surround you like a thick fog. You realize that when you choose to speak the truth of your heart, the world of scholars will slam the door shut in your face. Despite the coldness, the fire of creativity in you does not fade. Amidst headaches that begin to return more frequently, you start the project Untimely Meditations. You feel like an outsider to the age, looking at the self-satisfaction of post-war German society with a discreet disgust. You attack David Strauss for his shallowness. You write about the abuse of history, warning that if man only knows how to bow before the past, he will lose the ability to create the future. You praise Schopenhauer as a true educator, the one who taught you how to maintain independence amidst the crowd. Each essay is a step taking you further away from conventional standards. 1876 arrives, bringing the final essay on Richard Wagner. But the scent of worship has begun to be tainted by doubt. You feel headaches while writing about him. Your vision drops so severely that every word on the page seems to be dancing and blurred. Deep down, you feel a crack forming. The Wagner you once loved is gradually turning into a symbol of extreme nationalism and anti-Semitic ideas that you loathe. He is no longer your Dionysus. He is beginning to kneel before the values you are about to shatter. Summer 1876. You arrive in Bayreuth for the first festival. The clip-clop of horse hooves and the noise of the elite crowd envelope the small town. You enter the theater, but instead of finding sacred art, you only find the smell of vanity, the scent of expensive perfume, the smell of silk dresses, and the self-satisfaction of the German bourgeoisie. They come here not to be reborn, but to flaunt their status. You see Richard Wagner standing there, among generals and politicians, enjoying the worship of the herd. The moment Wagner tells you about the opera Parsifal, about Christian chastity and salvation, you feel as if a knife has pierced your heart. This is the ultimate betrayal. Your God has succumbed to the cross. You cannot endure another moment. You leave Bayreuth halfway, fleeing from the crowd's applause to seek the silence of the mountains. It was the last time you saw Wagner's face. Spiritual collapse leads to complete physical breakdown. You lie in a dark room, feeling a headache like it wants to crush your skull. The University of Basel allows you a leave of absence to find a way to save your life. And then you find Sorrento. The southern Italian town appears with the deep blue of the Mediterranean and the fragrant scent of lemon groves. The golden sun of Sorrento warms your pale skin, but your eyes are gradually fading. You are accompanied by Paul Ray, a positivist and sharp mind. Under the blue Italian sky, conversations with Ray sweep the last metaphysical mists of Schopenhauer out of your mind. You begin to learn to look at the world through the lens of psychology and realistic science. You and Ray dissect human morality together, realizing it is not the voice of God, but merely all too human structures built for survival. But while your intellect becomes clearest, Dr. Otto Iser delivers a cold sentence, an absolute avoidance of reading and writing for years to come. You sit there, in the darkness of the room in Sorrento, listening to the murmuring waves outside, and know that you can never stop. To stop thinking is to stop living. In 1878, the book Human, All Too Human was born. You discarded the long-winded writing style to choose the aphorism form. Short paragraphs, sharp as surgical blades, cutting away all illusions of divinity. You declare, there is no eternal truth, only small truths of science. You dedicate the book to Voltaire, the symbol of French reason, like a slap in the face to Wagner's dark romanticism. You send this book to Wagner, and almost at the same time, you receive the Parsifal script from him. The two works intersect in the post, as if two swords had crossed. The silence that followed was permanent. The greatest friendship of your life ended in the uncompromising confrontation of thought. Your rebellion has terrified old friends. They look at you as a madman, a destroyer. Your health collapses to the point you no longer have the strength to stand on the pulpit. Spring 1879, at age 34, you place your resignation on the desk of the rector of the University of Basel. You walk out of the academic building you were attached to for 10 years, feeling a painful relief. You are no longer a professor. You are only Nietzsche, a homeless man, a free spirit entering the loneliest expedition in history. You pack your last books into the worn wooden suitcase, feeling its weight on your trembling hands. You walk out of the rented room, the sound of the key turning in the lock, echoing dryly, closing a brilliant but stifling chapter of life. You step onto the street. The chill of the Basel early morning seeps into your lungs as you head toward the train station. The train whistle wails from afar like a call from the high peaks of the Engadin, where thin air and solitude wait to test your final will. Part 6. Resigning as Professor, Living a Lonely Wandering Life, 1879, 1882. You stand on the Basel platform, feeling the chill of the morning mist seeping through your thin wool coat. The train whistle shrieks, tearing through the silent air. But in your head, another shriek, even more terrible, is reigning. It is the migraine. It is no longer an uninvited guest, but has become a tyrant possessing your entire existence. You close your eyes, but even in the darkness behind your eyeballs, painful flashes of light dance, as if wanting to tear your retinas apart. The smell of coal and engine oil suddenly becomes so pungent, it makes your stomach contract violently. You dry heave, the bitterness of bile flowing in your throat, mixing with the saltiness of cold sweat drops rolling down your temples. You realize that this body is no longer a temple for the mind, but an iron cage slowly tightening around your soul. The words of Dr. Otto Iser still ring in your ears like a life sentence. An absolute avoidance of reading and writing for years to come. You laugh quietly in pain. How can a philosopher live without words? How can a traveler of the mind stop observing the world through the pages of ancient books? Your vision is now only a blurred mist, making every page you try to look at turn into a battlefield of smeared ink stains. In May 1879, you set your pen down and signed the resignation. You are no longer Professor Nietzsche of the University of Basel. You are only an anonymous man with a meager pension of 3,000 Swiss francs in your pocket. A sum enough for you not to starve, but also enough for you to realize that from now on you are completely alone in your own kingdom. You begin the life of a nomad, a reluctant climate expert, one who must flee the cold to save his eyes and seek thin air to soothe his lungs. You find yourself sitting in a cheap attic room in Genoa. The salty smell of the Mediterranean Sea drifts through the small window, but you must keep the curtains closed because even the thinnest ray of sunlight can make your head explode. You live on milk, bread, and bland bowls of soup, avoiding wine and everything that might trigger the pain. Yet, as your eyes close due to illness, your spiritual eyes open more brilliantly than ever. You cannot write long essays, so let your thoughts explode like flashes of lightning. You carry a small notebook, and in moments when the pain temporarily subsides, you scribble down words that only God and your loyal friend Peter Gast can read. You walk. You walk for miles, for hours, along the coast or through the trails of the Alps. The rhythm of your footsteps is the rhythm of philosophy. You realize that the greatest thoughts are not born behind a desk, but are forged on lonely roads under the sun. The wanderer and his shadow was born from those very steps. You look at your shadow on the ground and see the deepest internal dialogue. You begin to attack the ideals of the Enlightenment, mocking the innocence of Rousseau for believing in innate human freedom. To you, society is only a legalized system of revenge, and justice is but a mask for power. You feel the scent of liberation as each step takes you further away from the herd you once tried to fit into. In 1881, you find Sils Maria, a remote village situated at 6,000 feet above sea level, where the air is so clear it seems you could touch the sky. The smell of old pine wood and the cold of ice and snow envelope your senses. Here, the book Daybreak takes shape. You begin a brutal psychological surgery on Christian morality. You see humility and altruism not as virtues, but as the scent of weakness and fear. You begin to be drawn to the stillness of the East by the way Buddhism faces pain without the need for original sin. You feel like a traveler standing before a new dawn, where the shadows of the past gradually fade under the light of a cold reason. And then, on a fateful August afternoon at Lake Silvaplana, beside a towering pyramidal rock, a lightning bolt of thought changed your life forever. You stand there, amidst the absolute silence of the mountains and forests, and the concept of eternal recurrence emerges. This idea is so heavy, it could crush any weak soul. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more, and innumerable times more." You take a deep breath, feeling the thin air fill your chest. You are not afraid. You smile. You realize that the measure of a man is the ability to say yes to this life, even if it repeats 1,000,000 times with all its pain. That is amor fati. Let that be my love from now on. In 1882, amidst those lonely reflections, you write The Gay Science. You create the image of a madman carrying a lantern running into the marketplace in broad daylight, screaming a truth the world is not yet ready to receive. God is dead. God remains dead. and we have killed him. You do not say that with the joy of a shallow atheist. You say it with an infinite anxiety about an abyss of emptiness, nihilism, waiting to swallow Europe. You feel the scent of a new era coming, where man must become his own god if he does not want to be destroyed in meaninglessness. While you are standing on the peak of intellectual solitude, the spring of 1882 brings you a ray of light named Lou Andreas Salome. In Rome, under the shadow of ancient structures, you meet the 1-year-old Russian girl with burning, intelligent eyes. You feel a bolt of electricity run down your spine. Finally, you think you have found a soulmate, a free spirit who can understand the abysses you are exploring. You, along with Paul Ray and Lou, form an intellectual trinity. You see yourself standing in a studio in Lucerne, playing the horse pulling the small cart on which Lou is swinging a whip. An ironic photo, a portent of power and submission. You propose to her, not just once. You long for a connection between two lonely souls in a universe without God. But life is not a poem. Paul Ray's jealousy and your sister Elizabeth's toxic interference began to sow the seeds of breakdown. Elizabeth, the woman with conservative thoughts and extreme possessiveness, wrote letters defaming Lou, calling her a libertine. You are caught between love, friendship, and family. The summer of 1882 inches Tautenberg, among the ancient oak trees, you and Lou had the happiest conversations of your life. The smell of forest leaves and the warmth of understanding deceived you. You did not know that the shadow of betrayal was approaching. At the end of that year, in Leipzig, everything collapsed. Lou and Ray left, leaving you standing alone under the cold rain. The solitude now is no longer the brilliant solitude of philosophy, but the dark solitude of an outcast. You feel the bitterness of betrayal seeping into every cell. You turn to opium to soothe the suicidal thoughts surrounding you. You find yourself wandering in the Bay of Rapallo, looking out at the gray sea, feeling the shattering of your heart. Yet, it is from this pit of despair that a voice stronger than ever begins to echo in your mind, the voice of a prophet, Zarathustra. In just 10 days of January 1883, you write like one in a fever, as if the words were carved directly from your pain. You realize that Lou Salome left so that Zarathustra could step forward. The pain has been refined into the power of the Übermensch. You walk out of the small rented room in Rapallo, your feet touching the wet sand of the beach at dawn. The smell of sea salt and the early wind blow away the last remnants of opium in your breath. You look toward the horizon, where the sun is beginning to dye the water red. You begin to climb the coastal cliffs, the sound of the waves murmuring at your feet like the applause of the past left behind. You feel the hurried breath in your chest as you reach new heights, where the cold and pure air waits to receive the first prophecies of Zarathustra. Part 7. Completing the masterpiece. Thus spoke Zarathustra, 1883, 1885. The cold of the coastal cliffs of Rapallo seeps through your souls, reminding you of the existence of a gradually exhausting body. You stand there, watching the white-capped waves shatter on the reefs, feeling the pungent smell of salt mingling with the scent of winter winds blowing from the Mediterranean. Your world right now is but a heap of ashes after the collapse of the relationship with Lou Salome and Paul Ray. An absolute solitude, so heavy that sometimes you feel your chest being constricted. You turn to opium to soothe the stomach cramps and calm the agony screaming in your soul. The bitter drops flow through your throat, carrying a temporary numbness, but from within the hazy mist of drugs and pain, a strange energy begins to explode. In January 1883, you find yourself sitting at an old wooden table in a small rented room, the flickering candle casting long shadows on the white lime walls. You write. You write like one in a fever, as if your hands no longer belong to you. The words pour onto the paper like an unstoppable torrent. In just 10 days, the first part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra is formed. You feel that you are not the creator, but merely a vessel, a medium receiving words dictated by some supernatural force beyond control. The smell of fresh ink and the rustling of the pen nib on rough paper become the only sounds connecting you to reality. You realize that to give birth to a dancing star, one must have chaos within oneself. But then, a thunderbolt from Venice tears through your state of trance. In mid-February 1883, Richard Wagner passed away. Your teacher, spiritual father, and also your greatest enemy is no more. You stand stunned in the middle of the street, feeling an immense void just opened in your spirit. Although the two of you had not spoken for 6 years, Wagner's death is like a giant mountain collapsing into the deep sea. An important chapter of your life has officially closed, leaving you stranded in a world without the old idols. You take a deep breath, feeling the coldness of the air, and know that now you must move forward alone to complete the prophecy of Zarathustra. You begin an endless journey through different lands, like a traveler seeking a home for thoughts that are too grand. In the spring of 1883, you come to Rome, trying to find some family warmth through a temporary reconciliation with Elizabeth, but your mind belongs to the peaks. You move to Sils Maria, where the air is so thin and clear that you seem to be able to see through time. Here, amidst the smell of dry hay and old pine groves, the second part of the masterpiece is completed. You send the manuscript in July, then continue your journey to Nice in the autumn. Under the brilliant golden sun of southern France, the third and fourth parts were born in succession. Each part is a step taking you to new heights of insight. The publishing of Zarathustra is another torture for your pride. The publisher, Ernst Schmeitzner, repeatedly delays, perhaps because they fear the blasphemous declarations lying within the manuscript pages. You feel the scent of fear and prejudice enveloping the intellectual circles. When completing the fourth part in 1885, you do not even dare to publish it widely. You pay out of your own pocket to print exactly 40 copies, only for friends you believe have enough courage to look into the abyss. The indifference of the public causes you pain, but it also makes your heart harder. You realize that you are writing for people 100 years later. Why Zarathustra? You choose the ancient Persian prophet not to honor him, but to reverse the very moral system he created. The historical Zarathustra was the first to split the world into good and evil. And now, your Zarathustra comes down from the high mountains after 10 years of seclusion to correct that mistake. You write in the style of the Fifth Gospel, mimicking the parables and the rhythm of the Bible to create a new system of values. Every saying of Zarathustra carries the weight of prophecies, requiring the listener to tremble before the collapse of old truths. The most shocking concept appears in Zarathustra's sermons: God is dead. You say that not with resentment, but with an immense sadness of a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness in Western culture. The rise of science and reason has eroded the metaphysical foundation of Christianity, leaving a terrifying void named nihilism. You feel the smell of decay in traditional moral values. If there is no longer a God to guide, where will humanity drift? Zarathustra brings the only solution: Übermensch. The Übermensch is not a brutal conqueror, but the meaning of the earth. It is an individual who dares to create values for themselves, affirming this earthly life instead of dreaming of a distant heaven. I teach you the Übermensch. Man is something that shall be overcome.
What have you done to overcome him?
You imagine the Übermensch as a brilliant star, appearing after the long night of nihilism, a perfect union of power and pure creativity. The opposite of the Übermensch is the image of the last man whom you utterly loathe. These are the people of modern society, those who only seek security, comfort, and tiny pleasures. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and blink thereby. You smell the scent of stagnation in these self-satisfied crowds. They avoid all risks, all great pain, and because of that, they also avoid all rising. You fear that the world will turn into a uniform herd, where dancing stars no longer have the chance to be born from chaos. And then, the harshest test appears: eternal recurrence. If time is infinite, then every event in your life will repeat countless times. Do you have enough courage to embrace all this joy and pain once more, and countless times more? The ability to say yes to this eternal loop is the ultimate measure of amor fati. You feel the vibration of the entire universe. As your soul accepts this destiny, only the Übermensch can smile at the eternal recurrence of existence. The foundation of all this is the will to power. You realize that every living being does not just want to survive, but they want to expand and overcome themselves. And life confided the secret to me. Behold, it said, I am that which must always overcome itself. You describe this process through the metaphor of the three transformations. First, the spirit must be the camel, resigned to bearing all the weight of tradition. Then, it must turn into the lion, using claws to tear apart the thou shalt chains to affirm I will. And finally, it must become the child, a new beginning, an innocent and non-regretful game of creation. Yet, the masterpiece you consider a gift to humanity is received with a terrifying silence. Unsold books pile up in the print shop, the smell of new paper beginning to be covered in dust. You find yourself lonelier than ever. No wife, no children, no students. Old friends are scattered everywhere, and they no longer seem to understand your language. But the rejection of the world only makes your soul tougher. You use pain as a fuel to write sharper, more violent works. You feel like an eagle flying over high mountain peaks, looking down at the bewildered herd below. The final family rift also arrives. In 1885, Elizabeth decided to marry Bernhard Förster, a notorious anti-Semite. You see this union as a disgrace to your blood. You despise his extreme nationalism. Despise the crazy project named Nueva Germania in Paraguay. You refuse to attend the wedding, watching your sister leave Europe to pursue a wretched illusion. You stand there, alone in Nice, feeling the chill of betrayal and the absence of readers. You realize that the true philosopher must always be a lonely traveler, the one who carries his torch into the darkness. You pack the last manuscript pages, feeling the weight of the thoughts that have changed your life. You walk out of the rented room, the sound of the nice sea waves still murmuring like the whisper of an old lover. The sky is turning to the deep purple of twilight, and you find yourself needing to find another place, a city of light and absolute clarity. You step down the stone stairs leading to the train station, feeling the cold wind blowing from the north, signaling the coming winter. You pull up your collar, your blurred eyes looking toward the horizon where the tracks stretch toward Turin, where the final brilliant days of the mind await you. Part 8. Writing many philosophical books, but being ignored. 1886, 1887. The sound of the train wheels grinding on the cold iron tracks of the winter of 1886 echoes steadily, like a dry pulse amidst the gray space of Europe. You sit with your head leaned against the window, feeling the cold from the glass seep through your temples, where migraines still smolder, waiting to erupt. The smell of train smoke, the scent of old leather-bound seats, and the moisture of your own breath envelop your senses. You have just made a brutal decision to completely break with the publisher Ernst Schmeitzner. You feel an intense disgust rising in your throat when you think of your manuscripts being completely buried and in this anti-Semitic dump. For a free spirit like you, prejudice and narrow nationalism are a manifestation of the deepest cultural decay. You choose anonymity, choosing to pay out of your own pocket for printing, rather than letting your thoughts be stained by lowly souls. The loneliness at this time does not only come from the outside world, but it creeps into the very core of your family bond. You receive letters from Elizabeth, but every word carries the scent of betrayal. Your sister, who was once your only support, has now chosen to link her life with Bernhard Förster. You see in him everything you hate, a blind worshiper of Wagner, a nationalist extremist, and a notorious anti-Semite. You protested vehemently. You used the most bitter words to stop it, but in vain. The wedding took place in May 1885, without your presence. And now, at the beginning of 1886, they have departed for Paraguay to build their insane Nueva Germania colony. You stand alone on the platform, feeling the cold of permanent separation. The void Elizabeth left is not just an absence, but an open wound in your soul. But amidst the siege of illness and estrangement, your creative will burns more fiercely than ever. Your vision has declined to the point you can only see the world through a thick mist, and every time you try to write, migraines strike down as hammer blows. You lie in dark rooms in Nice or Sils Maria, breathing the smell of painkillers and the cold of silence. You set about republishing old works, writing new prefaces to consolidate your system of thought. You want the world to see that every step of yours, from the birth of tragedy to the gay science, is a piece of a great puzzle. You are an architect, building a temple for the future, even as your hands tremble from exhaustion. In March 1886, you complete the manuscript for Beyond Good and Evil. You decide to abandon the metaphorical cloak of Zarathustra. You no longer want to borrow the words of an ancient prophet. You want to speak directly, to use prose sentences as sharp as knives to dissect directly into the heart of Western philosophy. You feel the weight of every aphorism as you set your pen down. You are no longer seeking the consensus of the crowd. You are writing for a philosophy of the future, intended for spirits strong enough to stand above the prejudices of the age. In this work, you launch an attack on your own predecessors. You look at Plato, Kant, or Hegel and realize that their great philosophical systems are actually the personal confession of its author, and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. You smile at their vanity when they pretend to search for objective truth. To you, there is no absolute truth out there. From now on, there is no truth, only interpretations. You propose perspectivism, where every perception depends on the subject's perspective. You evaluate an idea not based on logical right or wrong, but based on its survival value for life. You go deeper into dissecting the origin of morality, the chain that you believe is holding humanity back. You criticize egalitarianism and democracy as remnants of Christianity, a movement you call the inheritance of the Christian movement. In opposition, you bring forth the concepts of master morality and slave morality. You imagine the strong, the noble ones, who decide their own values. The noble type of man regards himself as a determiner of values. They do not need the recognition of the herd. They love what belongs to strength and despise what harms their rising. Meanwhile, slave morality is born from resentment, exalting sacrifice and altruism, only to pull the exceptional ones down to the level of their own weakness. You pay out of your own pocket to print 1,250 copies of this book, hoping for an echo that will shatter the surrounding silence. But the result received in February 1887 is a bitter number. Only 65 copies were sold. Thousands of your other books are still lying moldy in the warehouse, the smell of damp paper and dust seemingly swallowing your existence. You walk the streets of Nice, feeling like a ghost, talking to people who have not yet been born. The public's ignorancy is a heavy blow, but instead of collapsing, it urges you to go further, to write more sharply, to wake them up. In the summer of 1887, you begin writing on the genealogy of morality. You want to turn it into a polemic, a relentless historical anatomy. You do not argue abstractly. You trace the origin of language. You realize that the word good in ancient Greek or Latin originates from words indicating nobility and power. You smell history in the words. You point out that a moral revolution occurred when the priestly class, those physically powerless, used resentment to reverse values. They turned weakness into virtue and strength into sin. You feel a deep disgust, realizing that the entire Western civilization is being built on the hatred of those incapable of living intensely. You write about the ascetic ideal, about how religion uses guilt to tame humans. You hear the whispers of the pastors telling their sheep, "You alone are to blame for yourself." You see the denial of the body, the hatred of instincts, as a spiritual suicide act. You want humans to return to the earth, to the body, and to their will to power. Every chapter of yours is a destruction, clearing the way for a rebirth you always dreamed of. Amidst the darkest days, a few glimmers of light appear from the horizon. You meet Meta von Salis, a courageous intellectual woman who finds in your philosophy a kindred voice for her desire for independence. Discussions in Sils Maria with her help you feel less lonely. And then you happen to read Fyodor Dostoevsky. You feel an intense vibration in your soul when exposed to his painful and complex characters. You call him the only psychologist from whom I have anything to learn. You realize you are not alone in exploring the darkest corners of man. Most specifically, your reputation begins to cross German borders. You receive a letter from Georg Brandes, a Danish literary critic. For the first time, someone at a distant university is preparing to teach your philosophy. You feel a new vitality blowing through your dark rooms. You take a deep breath of the cold, nice air, feeling the vibration of the final days of 1887. The ignore, the family pains, and the illnesses seem to be receding to make room for a final creative storm. You pack your belongings to leave Nice as the spring of 1888 approaches. You feel a strange clarity, a state of euphoria you have never experienced. You step onto the train, the smell of the Mediterranean Sea fading behind you as the train begins its journey north. You stand by the train window, watching the olive groves recede as the train crosses the Italian border. The Alps appear hazily in the distance, and you find your heart filled with a terrifying eagerness. You are going toward Turin, the city of straight avenues and clear skies, where you feel destiny is spreading its arms, waiting for you in the final brilliant and tragic moments. Part 9. Creative Explosion in the City of Turin, 1888. The train whistle shrieks and then recedes into the night as you step off at the Turin station on a spring afternoon in 1888. A clear, cold breeze from the Alps blows in, embracing your weary body after nearly 10 years of wandering. You take a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, your chest no longer feels the constriction of pain. The pungent aroma of roasted coffee from small roadside shops blends with the scent of ancient stonework and the elegance of the Piedmont region. You walk through the majestic arcades, gazing at the straight avenues and feeling an absolute charm enveloping your lonely soul. Turin is not just a city, it is a fateful haven, where the light of your reason will flare up one last time before sinking into eternal darkness. You find yourself sitting in a small room overlooking Piazza Carlo Alberto, where the golden sunlight of northern Italy casts upon the red brick walls. A miraculous phenomenon has occurred. The intense headaches that once tortured you suddenly vanish like a spell. You feel a powerful vitality flowing in your veins, a state of mania you have never experienced in your life. You eat with more appetite, you sleep more deeply, and your blurred eyes seem to have found their sharpness again to see through the secrets of the universe. You write letters to friends with an almost excessive fervor, praising Turin as the most perfect city in the world. You feel you are no longer a sickly human. You are a god walking among mortals. This physical liberation is the final amnesty granted to you by destiny, so that you can complete your great legacy in an unprecedented creative earthquake. In less than a year, you have lived and written with the energy of an entire lifetime. 5 books were born in a frantic concentration, like a volcano erupting thoughts that had been suppressed for decades. First is the case of Wagner. You pick up your pen, feeling the sharpness of intellect as you write the indictment aimed at your old friend. The scent of old friendship has turned into the smell of cold contempt. You condemn Wagner as a symbol of decadence, a man who turned music into an opium to lull the crowds. You do not hold back, calling him a traitor to the Dionysian spirit for kneeling before the sentimental emotions of Christianity. To you, Wagner is now merely a slave morality, disguised in the cloak of genius. Next, you swing your philosophical hammer in Twilight of the Idols. You mock the empty values of Western culture, tapping on the divine statues of Socrates, Plato, and Kant to show the whole world the emptiness within them. You feel your power increasing with every line. What does not kill me makes me stronger. You declare a cruel truth, that there is no absolute truth, only perspectival interpretations. You stand there, in the room in Turin, feeling like a destroyer of humanity's greatest illusions. But the harshest judgment is still ahead. The Antichrist is born in a direct and uncompromising hostility. You trace the origins of Christian morality, calling it a nausea toward life itself. You smell the rot in every teaching of meekness and cowardly altruism. You respect the figure of Jesus as an outsider to society, but you curse the church for turning his message into a manipulative system. Christianity promises everything, but keeps nothing. You feel you are conducting a total war against heaven, using knowledge to burn away the chains of faith. And then, in a state of extreme megalomania, you pen Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, an autobiography whose title is A Defiant Challenge to God. You ask yourself why you are so wise, why you are so clever, and why you write such good books. I am no man, I am dynamite. You feel your name will be linked to an unprecedented crisis on Earth. The smell of pride blends with the scent of ink, creating a thick atmosphere of self-esteem exceeding human limits. Finally, you assemble Nietzsche contra Wagner to permanently seal your independence, clearly drawing the line between a free spirit and toxic nationalism. Yet, that horrific intensity of work has begun to exhaust your final nerve fibers. The boundary between genius and madness gradually becomes as blurred as the early morning mist on the Po River. You find yourself falling into states of joy so intense they are delirious. The innkeepers look at you with concerned eyes as they hear the clashing sounds of the piano echoing all night from your room. You play Wagner's music from memory, but with an unusual frenzy. Sometimes, you strip off your clothes and dance naked in the room, feeling you are reenacting the rituals of Dionysus. You scream into the lonely void, pleading for an understanding the world has never granted. Complete collapse appears through the Wand Brief. In the final days of 1888, your ego has completely broken away from reality. You write letters to kings, to the Pope, demanding they act according to your will. You are paranoid that you are re-establishing the world order. You sign the letters as Dionysus, or sometimes the Crucified. A terrifying identification between the philosopher of destruction and the symbol of sacrifice. I would much rather be a Basel professor than God. Your words are no longer philosophy. They are echoes from a disintegrating mind. In a brief letter sent to Cosima Wagner, you write, Ariadne, I love you, Dionysus. All the emotional entanglements, the pains suppressed throughout a lifetime, now flare up in a final delirium. The philosophical dynamite you were proud of has exploded right inside your own brain, leaving a brilliant and tragic ruin. You walk out of the rented room on a cold January morning in 1889. The smell of cold air and salt frost makes you shiver, but your eyes are now empty, no longer containing the light of intellect, but the silence of nothingness. You walk toward Piazza Carlo Alberto, feeling the ground beneath your feet shaking. You stand in the middle of the square, seeing a horse being tortured by a coachman with cruel whiplashes. A powerful emotion rises, an ultimate sympathy for the pain of a creature. You run forward, throwing your arms around the horse's neck and sobbing bitterly before collapsing onto the cold stone floor. Part 10. Mental Collapse and Silent Death. 1889. 1900. You walk on the cobblestones of Piazza Carlo Alberto on a January morning in 1889. The cold of Turin at this moment no longer brings clarity as in previous days, but it creeps through your coat, seeping into your flesh like a portent of the freezing of the mind. The smell of salt frost blends with the smell of road dust and the heavy breath of the draft animals. Before you, a cruel scene is unfolding. The whip crack tears through the air, falling onto the thin back of an exhausted old horse. You hear the heavy gasping of the beast, see its eyes blurred with pain and resignation. A final string in your soul has just snapped. You, who spent your whole life praising strength and the will to power, who once despised pity as a decadent disease, are now struck down by ultimate compassion. You rush forward, hugging the horse's neck, feeling its weak warmth and rough fur under your trembling hands. Your tears fall, joining wordless sobs. You collapse onto the cold stone pavement, and in that moment, the world of brilliant ideas suddenly goes out. An immense darkness envelops you, permanently closing the journey of a philosopher and opening a decade of silence. How ironic that the dynamite you were proud to be now disintegrates in the arms of a small creature undergoing torture. In the final days of lucidity, your mind begins to soar into paranoid lands. You see yourself no longer as Nietzsche, but as Dionysus, as the crucified. You sit in a dark room. The smell of ink and old paper now carries the flavor of mad masses. You write the last letters to the world, signing with the name of a furious god. You write to Cosima Wagner, calling her Ariadne and professing the love of a god. You are delusional that you ordered the Pope's imprisonment, that you are re-establishing the order of the entire universe. I would much rather be a Basel professor than God. Your words are now only fragments of a broken mirror, reflecting a megalomaniacal ego drifting into nothingness. Franz Overbeck arrives in Turin amidst a gray rain. You look at your closest friend, but no longer recognize the light of understanding in his eyes. You are but a child in a man's body, sitting at the piano and singing chaotic songs with no beginning or end. The smell of the train carriage lasting 2 days and nights, taking you back to base, L, no longer carries the flavor of promotion, but the smell of ultimate failure. You are taken to a psychiatric clinic, where the stark white walls and the pungent smell of disinfectant become the new boundaries of your life. At the Jena Asylum, under the observation of Dr. Otto Binswanger, you are labeled a patient with paralysis progressiva, a diagnosis that will haunt your legacy for a century. But is it truly so? Later researchers will wonder if it was a retroorbital meningioma that grew silently alongside your great thoughts, or the hereditary vascular syndrome codicil that once took your father's life. Whatever the cause, the brain that once wrote Zarathustra is now but a wasteland, where ideas no longer sprout, leaving only absolute silence. In March 1890, your mother, Mrs. Franziska, enters the hospital room and takes your thin hand. The smell of devotion and pious maternal love envelops the cold space. She takes you home to Naumburg, refusing to let her son fade away in a medical facility. You return to the old house, where the smell of dried flowers and the church bells from childhood still linger in the hallways. You sit in the armchair by the window, your vacant gaze looking out at the garden, where fallen leaves are swirling in the autumn wind. You no longer read, no longer write, no longer recognize the books bearing your name that are beginning to shake the world outside. The paradox of destiny at this moment becomes more bitter than ever. You, who declared God is dead, now completely depend on the compassion of a pious mother. Every day, she bathes you, feeds you, and prays for the soul of her sinful yet beloved son. You live in a salvation you once hated, enveloped by a morality you spent your whole life trying to destroy. You spend most of your time in passivity, occasionally having a few meaningless agitations like echoes from a distant battlefield in your mind. In April 1897, the final warmth of a mother disappears when Mrs. Franziska passes away. The responsibility of caring for you falls into the hands of Elizabeth, the sister who just returned from the failure of the New Germany project in Paraguay. She takes you to the city of Weimar, into the Villa Silberblick, standing tall on the hill. Here, you are no longer a human, but become a living exhibit. Elizabeth drapes a pristine white cloak over you, like an ancient prophet, so that the curious can come to admire the silence of a faded genius. The smell of falsehood and ambition begins to envelop your legacy. While you sit there, unconscious and silent, Elizabeth begins to misappropriate your manuscripts. She cuts, distorts the notes on the will to power to serve her extreme nationalist ideology. You, who once said that all anti-Semites ought to be shot, are now turned into a symbol for the very people you despised most. A betrayal of blood, heavier and more cruel than any academic criticism. The final years of your life are a series of quiet strokes. Each stroke strips away a part of your ability to react to the world. You are paralyzed on one side, lying still on the white bed, with only your steady breathing as the sole sign of life. August 1900, pneumonia strikes amidst the sweltering summer of Weimar. The final strength of the god Dionysus has run out. On the night of August 24 into the morning of August 25, a final stroke takes you away from this physical shell. Friedrich Nietzsche drew his last breath at age 55, in a room full of sunlight, but completely silent. The 28th of August, 1900, your body is taken back to Röcken. You return to the Saxony land, where you first cried out at birth. The final paradox takes place as your coffin is lowered right next to your father's grave, under the shade of the church you spent your whole life rejecting. The sound of earth falling on the coffin lid echoes amidst the silence of the countryside, marking the end of a stormy life. Holy be your name to all future generations. Peter Gast's eulogy sounds like a new prophecy. You have lain down, but your thoughts begin to stand up and roar. The silence of the last 10 years was the lull before a cultural storm that would change the entire next century. You return to the earth, where the seeds of the Übermensch will begin to take root, waiting for a day the sun of the future warms them. Night falls on the Röcken cemetery. The smell of damp earth and old pine fragrance envelops the new grave. A gentle breeze blows past, carrying the whisper of pages being turned all over the world, bringing the soul of the wanderer to finally find eternal rest in the memory of humanity. The blinding light of intellect finally fades, making way for 11 years of absolute silence and peace. You find yourself sitting quietly in a wheelchair at Villa Silberblick, Weimar, looking out the window toward the forests, changing colors as autumn touches the land. The books bearing your name are now shaking the very foundations of Western civilization out there. But in this quiet room, there is only the ticking of the wall clock and the warm hands of your sister stroking your thin shoulders. You no longer need to fight intense headaches. You no longer have to flee the darkness or scream into the void searching for understanding. Everything now is just a pure existence, like a child enveloped in the heart of a forgiving ocean. The passing of Friedrich Nietzsche on an August afternoon in 1900 did not bring pain, but a final liberation. A stormy journey, full of betrayals and solitude, has finally found a peaceful harbor. You are brought back to Röcken, lying down in the cool earth of your homeland, right next to the grave of the pastor father you always loved. It is strange how the man who once declared God is dead finds rest in the shadow of a church, next to the father who spent his life serving God. Perhaps, at the end of all understanding, all contradictions are resolved. The wind blows through the old pine groves in Röcken, carrying the scent of eternity and the promise of return. Although the life of Friedrich Nietzsche closed in silence, the resonance of your thoughts will exist forever, reminding humanity of the courage to be oneself, of the love for destiny, and of the power to create meaning even when the world seems empty. Now, let the final ideas dissolve into the night. The heavy feeling of your eyes is pulling you into a deep sleep, warm and dreamless. All efforts of today have ended, and you deserve to rest. The world out there has receded into the past. Only absolute peace remains, enveloping this room. Good night, traveler of the mind. Tomorrow will be a new beginning, but tonight there is only peace for you.